Enola Holmes 2, a movie I have been super looking forward to since it was announced that the first one would be getting a sequel. I was so excited when I first watched the original Enola Holmes movie. I think it was just such a refreshing breath of air from a lot of the usual fare that you get in terms of action movies. First of all, it starred Millie Bobby Brown as the central character Enola Holmes, who took over the kind of mantle from her brother Sherlock Holmes, who of course is in these movies, but the real focus is on Enola and trying to find her own voice outside of the shadow of her brothers, obviously, who both are established in their own right in society. So the first movie really dealt with a lot of introducing the characters, kind of finding Enola's footing, and like I said, it was a very nice change of pace, I think, to get a main character who was this kick-ass detective who was a 16-year-old girl, actually played by a 16-year-old girl, who had a very age-appropriate love interest, and just a lot of the plot was centered around Enola standing up for herself and on her own. So I was super happy when it was announced that there would be a sequel, because I definitely think this series has franchise potential, and I'm happy to report that I think the second movie improved even more upon the first one. I think the first one laid a lot of groundwork, but there was so much introduction of characters and ideas that I think sometimes it got a bit cluttered, and I just feel like this movie now was them stepping up their game and everything just felt bigger and more assured. First of all, I feel like Millie Bobby Brown really owned the role of Enola. Like, I feel like she is clearly so comfortable, not only as a leading lady standing on her own, but also as Enola and all the kind of idiosyncrasies that come with that, and, you know, the finding of her own voice and her own footing. I just feel like she really made this character her own in a way that, like, you know, characters you think of who belong to certain actors, right? But yeah, for this story, there's a couple different plots going, which I really like. So based on the trailer, we knew that there was something connecting her case to her older brother Sherlock's, and I did like how they used the cases this time. I think what they did really good in the first one that they kind of continued in this one was keeping Enola separate from Sherlock for a lot of it, because I feel like so much of what she says is true, that like if she worked with him, if she worked under him, she would always be in the shadow of who he is, because he is the world's greatest detective. And we even see that in the beginning when you think after everything that happened in the first movie and her solving that mystery, she would be getting the credit and be getting the kind of prestige that comes along with that. But instead, when she opens her own detective agency, people think her brother's the one that solved it. People don't want to trust her because she's a girl, because she's young, because she's inexperienced. Like, she has all these factors working against her, and I feel like they definitely included Sherlock a lot more, but I liked it because I think, one, it showed the similarities between Enola and Sherlock and like how he is the world's greatest detective, but so is she. Like, you know, they're very similar, and kind of the only difference in them is that he's had more experience with this, so he's a little bit quicker on the uptake. But I also really like there was a scene where she's kind of laying out all the evidence and putting the pieces together as he did, and you can tell how impressed he is with how quickly she's able to put it together. I just love seeing them like interact. Like, I think it really shows the similarities between them. There were so many moments where like they were just like quick firing off of each other and stuff like that, and there was also moments where like things would happen and they had the same reactions, like they would both roll their eyes at the same time. So I liked it because it just showed that kind of familiarity that they have with each other. The main story of this that Enola was investigating I loved, because it was basically she couldn't get any cases, and then this young girl who's even younger than herself, so who she obviously sees in herself, is like, no one will listen to me, like my sister's missing, and takes her to this match factory where girls have gone missing for a while now, and no one can really seem to put the pieces together. And I just loved unfolding the mystery. Like, the big reveal of Moriarty being involved in this, I gasped. I was floored to have both the Holmes take on Moriarty at this point. I kind of guessed who it was pretty quickly, because especially with the whole kind of scene she had with Enola where she was like, oh, like the game is fun, when she realized like how to play it, and just showing that like obviously she's in the background for a lot of stuff, but she's way more onto things than I think people are realizing. And I think it goes perfectly with this overarching theme that they've had since the first movie about how the underrepresented people and the people who are underestimated are the ones that can kind of hide in the background and cause really big things without people ever suspecting them of being it. So I think she was really cool, and I'm excited to hopefully, if they make a third one, to have her return. I just loved the mystery because it perfectly fit for Enola, right? Of like, she couldn't let go of this case because I think people thought it was like her pride or her stubbornness or something like that. And obviously she does also have those kind of flaws that run in the Sherlock family, because she wanted to do a lot of it on her own, and we saw that in how much she was pushing Tewkesbury away when he was trying to help, and every time she even like offered up something, she was like, forget that I said that, like I don't need help. And it was really nice to, I think, have her mom kind of lay it out for her of like, you can be independent and be fine on your own, but with other people, you can be extraordinary. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, you're good, you're fine on your own, but that doesn't mean that you need to push people away and not depend on other people, because there's strength in numbers, there's noise in numbers. And I think that was just such a great message, because I do feel like for Enola, like, I could definitely see a criticism being like, well, why does she still have to have a love interest, blah, blah, blah. Even like my mom, when I was watching it, was like, why does she have to have a love interest? And I'm like, well, that's the whole point of it, of like, you know, like, she could be on her own and she could be fine and successful and stand on her own 2 feet, and she's proven that time and time again. But what she has to learn is that it's okay to rely on other people, it's okay to trust other people. And I think that was just such the defining thing for her, and why she really couldn't let go of this case, because it was these girls who were underrepresented, who were underheard, underappreciated. They were just expendable to the people that were using them. And I mean, the whole entire thing, like I said, of piecing the puzzles together, Sherlock figuring out it's a dance at the same time that she's watching the actual dance and kind of figuring out the pieces in her head, I think was just so interesting and entertaining. And it really was a great mystery. Like, it drew me in. I'm trying to solve it like as I'm watching it. And again, I think that was where it was cool to see Sherlock and her kind of, they each had their own mysteries that they didn't know for a while were connected, but it was so interesting. And I think the filmmakers did a great job, like editing wise and cinematography wise, of showing them figuring out individually at the same time. It just felt like we were getting a better picture into Enola's mind and how she solves it, because like obviously we saw Sherlock and how he's got this kind of mess of things, and like everything looks messy, but like it's perfect in his mind. But for Enola, I like how it was more of like a sketchbook in her mind, and like how she would picture like the two opposing theories she had. So like, especially with Sarah, she was like, Sarah run or was she taken, you know? And I like that we could really see how she operated with things and how she kind of ran with it. And I think that was a really nice insight into it, because it kind of gave us this kind of more look into what she is picturing, right? I especially love, because I feel like it's just, that's the thing that shows how great of detectives the Holmeses are, is when she got arrested and in like 5 seconds Sherlock showed up and was like, hey, I went to your crime scene and this, and this shows that like you guys are actually the ones that did it and not Enola. Like, I love that. And talk about a bad villain. Oh my gosh, that guy, every time he came on, my blood was pumping. The inspector, like he was so good as like a snarmy kind of, you know, just crooked person who is clearly has no morals and is totally an abuse of power. And I think that was what makes these movies so great and so watchable, is that they can still, the themes are still so important to today. I didn't know until at the end when they explained it that this was actually based on a real person who was a pioneer for the women's rights movement in terms of like working conditions and stuff like that. And this is actually, the movie itself is not based on one of the books. They made their own story, and I think it's fabulous that they were able to make their own story that's just as interesting, and kind of in terms for me, honestly, more interesting, I think, than the first one. Like, I think the first one was a good establishing, but it was definitely like kind of, there wasn't as many broader parts of it, whereas I feel like this, obviously you could see all the moving pieces of it, right? Like, there's all the parts Sherlock's investigating, there's the missing girl, there was the typhus going on, which immediately my ears were perked to that, because it just seems so coincidental that they're looking for typhus at this factory and no one else seems to be really concerned about it outside of these girls. Like, you just knew all these different parts, and it's nothing new is the sad thing, right? Like, it's things that people still deal with to this day. And I feel like the movement of it definitely was reminiscent of Hunger Games, right? Of one spark can be the revolution. And I think it was even great because with that inspector guy who drove me crazy, his whole speech about like his job is to find those flames and stomp them out, and he's finally found someone in Enola who will not go quietly, and also Sarah and Will and like all these girls who would not go quietly, who were risking their lives to try and just tell the truth for what was happening, I think was just so amazing to watch. And then, like I said, I also really like Tewkesbury and Enola. I feel like I could see criticism where, because I think that's the other thing that we really have to look at, is like, I feel like for there to be a like strong, independent female character, right, people think like she doesn't need a love interest, which is the case sometimes. I think there is an unnecessary use of love interest in general, but I feel like if we're going to talk about unnecessary love interest, the people who generally get the shorter stick of that is actually like when you have a male-led thing and then you've got just like this like one-dimensional person as the love interest for the woman. So I feel like getting like her to have a love interest is not actually the problem. And what I love about Tewkesbury that continues from the first movie is that him and Enola are very different. He's not the fighter, right? Like she is. He's the one that taught her to dance. She taught him how to fight. He's into hobbies that would be seen, especially back then, as more traditionally feminine. Like he's really into gardening and his flowers. But what's great about that is that, like Peeta in the Hunger Games, these more traditionally thought of as feminine things are able to help the plot along and help our characters. So him knowing what exactly the flowers were was able to help Enola. He was able to help her with dancing and fitting in at the society more. He's able to get her in places. Like, I just really think it's great to see him be a love interest and a help to her in a way that's not like, oh, I'm going to protect you and be the muscle. Like, she's clearly the one protecting him, but he also brings his own skill sets, which I think is great. And I loved the final scene of, like, her facing off against the inspector, Tewkesbury fighting his own guy, and Sherlock fighting his own people, because, let's be honest, he is 6 foot and probably easily very muscular, so he needed more than one person. But it was just nice to see them fighting as a united front, taking down each of their opponents separately. I thought was just a really great thing. That's the thing about this movie, is I think the cinematography and the pacing of it was just so astounding to me. Like I said, one of my favorite parts was seeing Sherlock figure out the dance cipher at the same time that Enola is kind of standing above all the dances and watching it. So you're seeing, like, there's a cipher to the dances, and then Enola's also figuring out, like, the social aspect of it, like the different layers of this at the same time. I think they just did a really good job of showing that, of how it's like, oh, you've got this level of stuff, but then there's this whole hidden meaning underneath. And they show that with, like, very simply with the fans, and how that was kind of like flirtatious and all that, and how you could kind of communicate without a chaperone through that way. But then they took it a step farther and showed, like, how you can do this now with ciphers and with all the things that are being hidden with what William and Sarah had going on and stuff like that. And I thought it was just so wonderfully done. Like, I'm just so hoping this turns into a franchise. I love seeing Enola fight, and I love that, like, her mom showed up very briefly to rescue her and then was like, hey, I gotta go, but, like, taught her the lesson. And, like, Enola is still learning things from Sherlock, but is also teaching him things. I thought it was really cute that she was the one that found Watson for him. And as soon as she was like, have you ever thought about having a flatmate? I was like, oh my gosh, they're either going to introduce Watson in the next one, which I think will be so interesting. And I also really like, and this is a thing that I saw someone bring up in the first movie with her other brother, Mycroft, there's never any redemption for the bad people, right? Like, they're just bad. And I really appreciate that, because I feel like there's often times where you try and dissuade or just undermine kind of how bad people are because Enola's defiant, or Enola won't listen, or she's stubborn, right? But I feel like for this one, it was very, very clear, like with her brother Mycroft, that those people are the ones in the wrong, and that the Match Girls and Enola were the ones that were being taken advantage of and used in this, and that there was never any redemption. The inspector wasn't using this and taking the money because he had, like, a sick kid at home or something like that. Like, it was just greed and corruption that were fueling this. And I think what perfectly encapsulated this was the man who ran the factory losing his son and then still never doing anything. Like, he didn't speak up really when they were having their protests to put a stop to it, but it's like, you lost your child. And they were kind of talking about that, Sarah, when she had her whole big speech of, like, this has cost so many people so much, and yet it's still going on. And we also saw with the treasurer guy, when everything was revealed that his secretary was the one that was blackmailing everything, he still burned those papers because he's liable for that. And it's like, there were just so much layers to it that I loved. Of, like, there was no kind of redemption of a reason why they were like this. They were just like this because of the society and the corruption and the greed that they all had and held. Aside, honestly, from Moriarty, who just wanted to kind of be part of this game and be like, hey, if I'm going to be discounted and underused and underappreciated, like, I'm going to get away and get ahead in life any way that I can. And you kind of have to respect her for it, which I think is what makes her such an interesting villain. And I think what kind of puts her more on her toes. Like, we saw her interact with Enola and actually help Enola, right? Like, she was trying to help herself at the same time too, but, like, her advice did end up helping Enola. And that was a fun thing too, to see that Sherlock and her realized who it was at the same time. I think that was just so fascinating and so interesting, and I think she could really be a great villain. Like, we've seen her be a great villain, but every time you cast a new actor as that role, you're always like, Can they handle it? And I feel like she's definitely up for it, and knowing that she escaped now, that could be really interesting for a third movie if they have that. Hopefully they do, which I think would be really interesting to see how she could pit them against each other. And, you know, she's someone that is as smart as them and could take them on, so it'll be interesting to see what the next mystery will be that she takes on, if it'll be based on the books, if it'll be their own original one, because I think this definitely proves that they can handle originality and make it so interesting. And like I said, Millie Bobby Brown, I feel like just came into this role in this one. Like, I feel like obviously she's getting more confident, and I feel like she truly just was Enola. And I'd also like to see more of her and Tewksbury's relationship develop, because I think it's just very, very cute and sweet how, like, he doesn't want anyone but her, and, like, he understands her idiosyncrasies and loves her for it, and she loves him. And I just think it's so sweet, the relationship, and so different from what the kind of normal ones you would get are in this, with like a more stoic kind of love interest. I love that, like, he's into gardening and he's known as like the kind of peace conflict guy, and like he's the one that everyone's after as the eligible bachelor, right? Like, not her. And it's just really nice to see that kind of flipped on reverse. And you know what, also just like to let her be a fully formed human, to be like, yeah, she's a strong independent girl, but like she's also gonna get jealous when people are flirting or perceived to be flirting with the guy that she likes. And I just like that she gets to be multifaceted like that and is never shamed in the story for it or made to feel silly for it. Like, it's just who she is, and I love that the film can celebrate that. So yeah, I really, really enjoyed it. I think it was an even better improvement on the first one, and I loved the first one. So I'm just so excited to see what the potential for this franchise could be. And if you have seen Enola Holmes 2, please feel free to let me know what you thought about it, what your favorite parts were, what you thought of the developments character-wise and story-wise that we got, and the potential tease of where we could go in future movies. So yeah, thank you guys all so much for watching. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!